Well, a little more unceremonious than usual, but good morning, everyone. This is Mike Dane, the training director at MLS Technology. I have some very good news that we previously hadn't made anybody aware of yet, but this class is now a CE credit class as well. So whether you wanted it or not, you're going to get some CE credit for today's class. It's elective CE credit, but anyway, we put in a big request with OREC to try and get the matrix usage class as well as a handful of other classes set up for elective CE credit. So that's what we've finally got. We're still waiting on a couple other classes to get turned into other things or get turned into CE classes, but the end goal is that we're going to try and make sure that all of the classes that we present are CE credit, just as a whole. So whether it's hot CE or elective, we just want to make sure that's all available. Anyway, before we get started with the course itself, I did want to run through a couple of things. So all attendees are going to be on mute by default. There's going to be some options for you guys to ask questions, including the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. I would prefer if you guys end up putting any questions that you have into the Q&A section, primarily just because we want to ensure that the system notifies me of them. The chat section isn't particularly interested in trying to make it known that there's some chat that's been added. The Q&A section is a little bit more obvious. Additionally, I also wanted to mention that there is a chat section down there at the bottom as well. This is where you guys can post any comments, examples. If you guys have any stories you want to share about something, that's fine. You can do that in the chat section. This session will be recorded. We'll be sending a link to the recording after class. But if you do end up having any audio or video issues during the course, please let us know. Especially now that this is a CE class, we want to ensure that if you guys are having problems with the technology or anything like that, that you guys can actually get the help that you need to ensure that you're not missing out on any CE credit. And speaking of which, we'll get the information from this class's attendance sent off to OREC later today, and they should be able to get that recorded. I'll have to double check with my education director one more time, but because we hadn't initially advertised this as a CE class, which is part of the reason why it's so small today, that's okay. But yeah, we should be all right. All right. And as always, I think most of you guys here have participated in classes in the past, but just as a reminder, again, chat button down at the bottom is for any commentary you have, Q&A for any questions that you might have. And then you can hit that raise hand option if you guys have a question that you would like to ask with your voice. So if you hit that raise hand button, I'll assume you have a question and we'll just have you unmuted. Same thing goes if you guys are joining us on a mobile device. If you have a tablet or a phone that you're working with, those same buttons will be available. You just need to tap the screen in order for them to appear. All right. So that's it for the introduction phase. Close this out. There we go. All right, next we're going to be doing a poll. And actually, this didn't used to be required. Now that this is a CE class, if you guys are interested in the CE credit, I will need you to participate in this poll. This is also just kind of helping us curate what the content of the class will be to make sure that if any of you guys are new or if you guys haven't had any exposure to Matrix, we'll try and discuss things with a little bit more context and understanding. Speaking of which, it is officially 9:05. We're going to go ahead and start the course content. So as long as you guys stick around to the end of class and participate when required, you should be eligible for the CE credit. Oh, actually, no, I've read this. Okay. So thank you. Looks like everybody participated. We've got, actually, surprisingly enough, we've got 3 out of 4 of you guys are actually either new or relatively new. And it looks like there's a couple of you guys that are relatively new to the system as a whole. So actually, that's good. I appreciate you guys letting me know. I'll actually give a lot more content on why the tools that we're going to be discussing today are important and what situations to use them in. But let's go ahead and get started. So Matrix is our MLS system. This is where all of the listing data initially will get entered. There's going to be a bunch of search functions as well as a bunch of ways to kind of parse out the data of the listings that are coming into the system. We'll be discussing a lot of this stuff as time goes on, but just as a reminder, the MLS listing data, it's all contingent on the cooperation and compensation that's being provided through the multiple listing service. So everything that we're providing here is kind of just a database that you guys can use to allow those kinds of deals and transactions to occur and be facilitated with the cooperation and compensation that's found in our rules and regulations. So today's focus is entirely going to be on the actual database itself, how we can search within the system, how we can find the properties that we might be interested in, whether it's stuff that's off market, if you're looking for tax records, or if you're looking for listings that are currently active, or if you're trying to find things that are closed or are pending, anything like that, so that you guys can start doing comparable market analysis. There's a variety of different things that you guys can do in Matrix, and we'll be discussing a lot of the main elements of those. We do have some tutorial videos as well that might fill in some gaps. Whenever we send off the link with today's recording, I'm going to include a couple extra links with tutorials that are things that we don't cover in our class today, but might be useful to know. But you can kind of visit those at your leisure rather than having to sit through me talking about it. So the first thing I wanted to do is introduce you guys to how to get into the system. When you first sign into mlstechnology.com, which is where you guys should be going directly, I know a lot of people tend to go towards tulsarealtors.com, but mlstechnology.com will bring you to this interface. So it's not having to have you sign in with another link that you have to click on or anything like that. It's just straight into the portal. And once you guys get into the portal, Matrix is the very first link that we have available in the application section. Since this is kind of the tentpole item of the MLS systems, this is where you guys can find it. Now, you'll notice that it does have a similar logo to the Realist one. Really, they just changed the names on there. Both of them are made by CoreLogic. This is going to come up a little bit later because when you guys get into the Matrix system, there's going to be a lot of details and data that's going to be transferred over from other locations, primarily the other system being Realist. The Matrix is where we put all of our listing data. There's also going to be a lot of tax record information and other details that are going to be provided that go directly into the listing information without any extra steps on the listing agent's part. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Our homepage that we first land on is going to be something that we can customize. If you guys have any interest in customizing this, it's very simple. If you want to make any arrangements, you can just click and drag on some of these widget headers. So notice whenever you hold your cursor over the rest of this area, it's just going to be, turning into a finger for links and stuff like that. But if you put your cursor over that top header, you can click and then drag it to a new location. And notice it's showing the little dotted lines around where it is that I'm going to be dropping. So as soon as I let go, it puts it into that position. Do the same thing with my favorite searches. Move that into a different position along with my listings. Maybe change my hot sheets down here. So there's a variety of different ways that you guys can arrange this. But one of the important things I wanted to mention is that whenever you guys are going through and rearranging things, you also have the option on that header bar to collapse the section. So for instance, if it's something that you're not visiting frequently, but you still want to have quick and easy access to it, you can use that collapse option to just kind of minimize out of the way. There's also going to be an X, which means that you can actually get rid of something that's no longer wanted. So for instance, if I wasn't using this external links, because all these links can be found elsewhere anyway, I can hit that X. And what that does is it actually sends it under my additional widget. Now, I typically have my additional widget collapsed because if I don't have them on my main screen, I'm probably not going to be using it. But if you guys do end up closing something that you wanted to keep track of, so for instance, maybe my stats was important, I needed to put that on there, get my recent one home visitors so I know who's gone to visit my listings that I've sent them recently. If I wanted to see who I've contacted recently, I can pull that up, find any of my cards, external links. Now we got our matrix learning lab, a home visit. And as you can see, once we start putting all of the items onto the screen, it's going to start looking a little bit cluttered. I have to scroll up and down just to be able to see all of the things. And this, again, might not all be stuff that's actually 100% necessary. So for instance, this home visit thing, this is an ad for a service that CoreLogic has partnered with, allowing you guys to get photos and stuff like that. But besides there being a discount, I don't actually need this right now. So I'm going to hit that X to get rid of it. Matrix Learning Lab is especially handy for those of you guys who are just getting into Matrix for the first time. They've gamified this to an extent. So if you guys are trying to learn about Matrix, this will actually make it a little bit more fun and easy to keep track of, rather than it being some, boring dude's voice talking at you about a system for 2 hours. But it's a lot more interesting. I actually ended up learning a decent amount myself whenever they introduced this. So it's available if you need it, but in my case, I'm just going to hit that X to get rid of it. And again, notice anytime I hit that X, it just starts adding that under my additional widget section. So I can get rid of anything that's just kind of cluttering up my screen, or I can just collapse them, move them into different locations, and kind of arrange things the way that's going to help me the most. Just for some context, I spend a little bit more time on this than I think most people would, just because I used to teach a class on workspace optimization. It was very important to me whenever I was just at my computer a lot during the day doing the normal tasks of my job, to try and make sure that everything was where I needed it as quickly as I needed it. So trying to rearrange this into a order that's going to make some sense to you guys is going to be very beneficial in the long run. It'll save you guys a lot of time. All of those little moments that you have to think about where something is located, or scrolling up or scrolling down, or minimizing or maximizing, all of that stuff adds up over the course of your day. You can finish a lot more, do a lot more if you're rearranged in a way that's going to make sense to you. But that's about it for our homepage. We're going to be discussing the Market Watch and hot sheets a little bit later. But let's first talk, since all of this is going to end up bringing us to where we can actually start finding listings, let's first discuss how to get your information up to date. Because once we actually start finding things we want to send off to people, whether it's something on the Market Watch, or I've used a search to find it, or found something on the hot sheets that might be beneficial, all of this information is going to be sent off with a very limited amount of details that you've provided to us in the past. All of that can be found up at the top right corner. There's going to be a little drop down here. Right now it says working as training agent. Sometimes it'll just literally say hello and then whatever your name is. So if I wanted to access my settings, I can go down to settings here and then over to my information. So again, just click on your name up at the top right, go to settings, and then right over here, we've got my information. Now from here, this is going to allow us to double check that all the information that we have on here is what we need it to be, how we need it to be displayed. If you notice something on here that's locked down, so for instance, if my name is training, but I go by trainer, I can check that checkbox for override to try and make sure that whatever is displaying here can actually be overwritten and put in correct information. But I did want to point out that if you guys are getting to this page and noticing a bunch of things that are incorrect, that typically means that you're actually going to have that data updated with our membership team. So just give us a call. In fact, actually, here's our number. Give us a call. Let us know what the issue is that you have, whether it's just the wrong email address or if they've got your name misspelled or if the office is incorrect, whatever the case may be. Let us know, and that way it'll show up correctly in Matrix by default so that you don't have to use any of these override options, because that's the ideal. Now, if you do end up having a situation where all of your paperwork says William, but really you prefer to advertise yourself as Bill, you can have your billing information set up with William, and then of course come in here for the override. And whenever you end up changing this information, it's going to show this name whenever you guys are displaying your information for your clients. So that's actually what the rest of these tabs up here at the top are going to do. After we've solidified all the information that we need to have correct on here, hit save, and then head over to the header and footer section. Now, this is going to be just for printing things. You'll have a print header and a print footer that you can choose. If it's your first time on this screen, it's actually going to ask you to choose a specific theme first. So I'll just use this basic blue. Hit the preview button down at the bottom, and it'll allow you to see what this print header will look like. A little bit later in class, we'll actually see what these prints will do for us. They can be incredibly valuable, so it might actually be beneficial to ensure that all of this is up to date. And you can change all of the pieces of information that are going to display on those prints using these drop downs right here. So again, we get in, we choose a theme that we like, and then we get to choose which parts and pieces we're actually going to be using for this under the branding section. So I've already uploaded a custom photo. I've already gotten all of my branding set up so that I have, right, do I want my cell phone number to be there and then my office number to be second? Do I want my email address on there, or do I just want to put in our office location? So there's a bunch of different ways for us to kind of establish this so that it's only showing the information that you want. The same thing is going to go down here at the bottom under the print footer. So you got a bunch of different ways that you guys can customize this. I'm not going to linger on this quite as long as I used to, but make sure that this is all set up the way that you want so that whenever you guys do try to create a report or start printing something, it'll show your information correctly. The next section over is going to be your CMA cover sheet. The CMA cover sheet is actually something we discuss in our CMAs and Matrix class, which is this afternoon. Is that right? No, this afternoon is Advanced Matrix. CMAs and Matrix is actually next Wednesday in the afternoon if you guys are interested. But CMAs are a comparative market analysis. This is one of the foundational things that realtors will use to try and get a price assessment for a property. It's effectively a big picture of a small area, allowing us to gather a bunch of properties that are comparable to the subject property in question. And then you can find out what the pricing is for those properties. It's a very useful tool. The CMA cover sheet will only appear on the full CMA report in Matrix. So this might not be something that you necessarily need to go through and double check. And as you can see, even the change that I made changing from training to trainer is already represented here. So if you've made any changes on, again, that information tab, that'll cascade over into the header and footer, CMA cover sheet, and the One Home section, which we'll get to in a moment. But the next section down is going to be the email signature. Now, just as a reminder, the email signatures are actually something that putting it in manually is going to be kind of cumbersome. If you already have an email signature that your office has either created for you or that you've created for yourself and you like, you can actually just copy that information over and then just paste it in here. So as you can see, I've already got my name, my title, my contact information, and even our logo is built in there. All of this information is going to be combined so that whenever I end up just copying it from Gmail or Outlook or wherever and paste it in here, I'm not going to have to go through and change the text, change the font, change the size, the color. Even the photos will actually upload automatically. So instead of having to worry about, going through this big arduous process, I used to try and guide people through this, and it was just such a pain. Now that they actually allow you guys to just copy something and then just paste it in here, it's infinitely easier. So just take whatever the signature is that you're using elsewhere for any of your branded emails, etc. Just paste it in. Then finally, we have our One Home section. Now, this is something that we had changed recently. So I mentioned before, the reason why we wanted to show up in this section was to ensure that whenever we started sending items out to our clients, it would automatically include all of the information that we might need to send to them, including our contact information, our business acumen, a description of ourselves, whatever. All of that information is going to be on a system called One Home. So when the client sees listings that we've sent them, they see it in a system called One Home. Now, One Home allows us to have a photo for ourselves. In this case, I just uploaded some generic photo because I didn't like how big it was that it was showing my face. But I have a photo in here. This is the photo that would end up appearing whenever a client receives an email from me. So just like on our header and footer section, where I would put in the same photo here as I do on One Home, always make sure that you guys are uploading a photo of yourself that's the same photo that everybody will be able to see anywhere else they see your information. This is just a basic branding principle. I actually went to college for graphic design and marketing, and that was one of the key things that they kept on mentioning was always make sure that you use the same font, the same logo, the same photo, because the more people see that name, the more people see that photo, the more likely they are to remember it. So if you have a different headshot on your website as you do on your Facebook, as you do in One Home, that's going to cause effectively a fracture between all of the effectively personas that you have for yourself. So your Facebook account won't be seen as the same as your professional website account, which won't be seen as the same as your One Home listings that you've sent them. So having that kind of disarray can make it very difficult for people to remember you, which as real estate agents, you guys know that's the key element, is that people remember you. Anyway, make sure you guys use the same photo everywhere. They'll remember you better. Our contact information, again, got pulled over from this information tab. If you needed to add in any extra information, they provided the spaces to do so. And then down here at the bottom, there's a section here where you guys can explain yourself to the client, let them know about who you are. You can even provide a little video introduction if you would like. So for instance, if you guys have a YouTube channel where you introduce yourselves, or your company has a YouTube channel where they introduce the company, you guys can provide a link to that here. Coincidentally, this happens to be the only place that you guys can upload YouTube videos to our system. Or not upload, but use a link to a YouTube video. Anyway, so just make sure that you guys have all of these ducks in a row first. Again, just to clarify, when we first got into Matrix, we went up to the top right here, clicked the arrow next to our name, and then went to settings, and then information. Make sure that all of this stuff is up to date, ready to go. So let's head back to our homepage, and we're going to talk now about our search functions. So up at the top right corner, we actually have this little search section. This is going to be the first place that you guys can use to search. If you had just jumped into Matrix, somebody had just given you a property or a listing number, whatever the case may be, you guys can dive directly into checking the information on it right up at the top here. Now, it's important to recognize that I'm not going to be using the status option when I'm doing my search right now, because if you end up filling in any information on this, it's going to use that as a qualifier for our search. If we leave something blank, that means that it won't be part of the search criteria. So in this case, if I wanted to put in 5125 and then Sandusky, I can search for, in this case, it's actually 5125 South Sandusky Avenue. I'm leaving off the south on the street name, and I'm leaving off the avenue on there as well. The reason why is because when we see the term street name used, it's actually referring to literally just the name of the street, not the pre-directional, not the post-directional, not the street's type, like avenue, boulevard, etc. All of that can get dropped off. So what this effectively is doing is just creating a search with just these two elements, and we can typically guarantee that's going to find us exactly the address that we're looking for. So in this case, I've ran a search, and again, since I didn't put in a status, it was able to find all of the different times that this particular property had been listed. Now, since this is the first time we're actually looking at some of these search results, I wanted to address a couple other things. No matter where you guys are going to be searching in the system, there's going to be a bunch of sort options that are going to pop up. So on here, we can actually see our status is closed. This is our primary sort, so we can see the closed ones are coming first, and then the expired one is coming last. Then we see our school district is actually the secondary sort. This one happens to be redundant in this case, since what we searched for was one address. The school district is all going to be the same. So in that case, it's actually going to switch over to the final sort, which we can see over here on the right is the price. And I see that's labeled as the tertiary sort. Now, coincidentally, this happens to be effectively the reverse chronological order for the listings. We've got a listing that was put in 2012 and then ended up getting renewed and then finally sold later that year. But these other two are actually from 2004 and 2007. Now, on here, it's not exactly giving us an indication of what year it was. The reason I'm able to know that is because at the beginning of all of our MLS numbers, there's going to be 2 digits that are representative of the year that that listing was entered. In this case, I can see that both of these start with the number 12, and they are 7-digit long numbers. And these two above that are 6 digits long, it's 04 and 07, but they drop the preceding 0. So if I click on this listing, I can see that this was initially entered in February of 2004, which accounts for, again, the 4 at the beginning here. So jumping back to our results, we'll talk about navigation a little bit more later. I also wanted to indicate to you guys that there's going to be a bunch of little icons. We're going to talk about those a little bit more later. Sure, I apologize. I'm trying to stay a little bit more in line with our script now that we have a official CE credit for this. Yeah, that should be it. Okay. So, and actually, this is the end of our introduction to at least the search function on the home page. We're now going to shift over to discussing the regular search options. So again, this search that's on the home page is very handy if somebody has given you some information and you just needed to dive directly into it. You can just grab that house information. So if they just have the address or if they just have the MLS number, and then dive directly into that listing or the history of that property. The regular search functions are all going to be found up in this blue bar that's always going to be present at the top of Matrix. So this search function here is going to allow us to search for residential properties, commercial properties, the vacant land properties, and any of the leasing options. Now, just to clarify something real quick, because We've been having a lot of questions about this recently. The residential section and the leasing section are both going to be for residential properties only. We don't allow any commercial leasing options in our system, so this commercial section is actually commercial sales. So residential sales, commercial sales, vacant land sales, and then residential leasing. Now, these are the 4 property types that we use in our system. Anytime you guys are running a search for a specific type, so for instance, I'm going to be doing the quick residential search as our main examples. Whenever you click on that particular section often enough, it's actually going to add that section directly into your search dropdown. So notice I've already got quick res directly underneath where the residential section is. And what that's allowing me to do is instead of having to go into a sub menu just to get into it, I can literally just hold my cursor over search, click on quick res, and I'm already in there. I also wanted to point out that we do have a cross property search. A cross property in this case is actually indicating that we can create a search that's actually combining any combination of those property types. So if I had been unfamiliar with an area, or if there was some reason for me to try and search for any kind of property that's available for a certain client, I can combine together residential and vacant land, or maybe I wanted to see residential and lease. Maybe I wanted to see commercial and land. I can combine those by just clicking on one, holding down Control, and clicking on another one. So this way, if you guys wanted to just learn everything about a certain area and all of the listings that are in that area, we can select all of those property types. I'll click on a city just to choose as an example. And we've got 140 matches, which means that there are 140 listings combined between commercial, residential, vacant land, and the residential lease. Now, the reason we know that these are all currently for sale is because the one default that all of our search functions have is this active option. So let's navigate back to a little bit more familiar territory. Go back to the quick residential search. You notice as soon as I get back into the quick residential search, the only thing that's actually filled in on my search so far is just this active option right up here at the top. So if you guys are ever in a situation where maybe you're searching for properties that are not active, you'll actually have to uncheck this checkbox up here at the top in order to be able to do that. So if you do need to maybe run a CMA, or if you guys are doing a BPO or whatever you guys are doing, you can check those extra additional status options, but notice how it starts highlighting things. And you may have noticed this whenever I was doing that on the cross property search. If I select an item in a certain field, or if I start filling out some information, you notice how it shows that as blue. So it's actually giving us a little bit of a blue highlight to indicate that this particular collection has actually been made. Now, I'm going to uncheck some of these checkboxes, hold down Control, and then select House again, and we'll clear out this price. There we go. And what we can see here is that anytime we start adding in some criteria, so again, the only thing that's currently on there by default is active. As soon as I put in, let's just say 250, I can see that I've got 15 matches in the system that are currently properties that are active for 250 and then $1,000. So anytime you add in any details, you can watch that number go in real time. So for instance, if I put in 3 bedrooms, got 9 matches, bathrooms, 3 bathrooms, 4 matches. I want to make sure that there's at least 2 full bathrooms, down to 2 matches, and at least 1 half bathroom. Still 2 matches, and let's see if any of them are 2 stories. Aha. So if the criteria that our client had given us was 250,000, 3 bedroom, 3 bathroom, 2 full, 1 half, and then it needs to be 2 stories. Well, looks like we whittled all of our results down to just 1 match. Now, an important thing to remember when we're looking at this, especially when you guys are whittling down your results with some criteria, is that one of the things that we did not do while we were adding in some of these details was where we were going to be searching. So we can always go over to our results page, either down here at the bottom or up here at the top, and we can see where this is physically located. So in this case, it happens to be Broken Arrow on Narcissus Avenue. I can go back to my criteria, and if it wasn't where I was hoping to search, I can actually add in some details here in this center area. So I'll talk a little bit more about all of these other elements in a minute here. Let's talk briefly about the different ways for us to narrow down our search geographically. So right up here at the top, we have a button for map search. What the map search is going to allow us to do is actually narrow down our search results based on just the map itself. This is part of the reason why it's such a thorn in our side whenever we end up having somebody upload a listing and then the mapping is incorrect. There's a lot of problems with this, even just beyond, obviously agents trying to find the property. That could also mean that the comps in the area might not be done correctly, because if it's not mapped correctly, if somebody's trying to do a CMA or a BPO, it might not even show up in their search. So it's always important to make sure that it's mapped in a way that's going to ensure that the client knows exactly where that property is physically located. So if I start zooming in and I had a specific area that my client was interested in, there's some search tools up here at the top that we'll discuss a little bit later that we can narrow down our search by. But I'm going to head back to my criteria, and instead of using our map search, if I had a specific address that I wanted to search near, let's say that I wanted to do within 2 miles of, and we'll just put in that address we used already, South Sandusky. Oops. There we go. So now I've got map area selected. So even without having to use any of those mapping tools, when I go back to my map search, it now has a dot dropped exactly where that particular property is located. And then I've got a 2-mile radius around it. So it makes it really easy to try and narrow things down. I'm going to hit this clear map option to just get rid of all of that. We also have the option to search by a very specific address. You can add a series of addresses up to 10 at a time. So if you wanted to maybe gather a selection of listings and you only had the addresses for them rather than the MLS numbers for them, you can put those all in there. We also have the main ones that I think most people are going to be using: school district, city, county, or zip code. Now, all of these actually allow you to do a search effectively. So there's a space up here at the top. The school district and city ones actually will also include a little list that's underneath it that'll show you what you've selected. So for instance, if I started typing in Broken because I wanted to do Broken Arrow, notice how it automatically shows that that's been selected. And just like in an email, if you end up adding in a comma, you can add in something else as well. So now I've got Jinx, and I've also got Broken Arrow selected still. So you can add in multiple items at once. Bixby, there we go. So I've got Bixby, Broken Arrow, and Jinx all selected now. And again, just adding in that comma allowed me to do that. Now, this can be a little bit cumbersome. So what I sometimes suggest to people is to use these little pop-up windows that are to the right of all of those spaces to type. So when you click on that, it's going to bring up a section here. It's just a little pop-up. It has the exact same search function, but this time it's going to actually narrow our list down. So if I typed in Bixby, I can select on Bixby and then just click this add button. It's going to take it from the available options and put it into the current selection section. I'll do the same thing with Broken Arrow. Go. And then we'll also add in Jinx as well. Jinx, add, perfect. So then I just hit OK, and it adds all of those in there. And notice again, there's still a separation of the commas, but it just saved us the trouble of actually trying to find exactly which one was which, or what the school name was, or if it's spelled a different way than I was anticipating, whatever the case may be. Same thing goes for the city. So for instance, if you guys wanted to narrow it down again by Bixby, Broken Arrow, and then of course Jinx. Perfect. So you can ensure that the school district and the city are all going to be matching. Now you notice that all of these also have little or and not options. Whenever we send out the videos recording today, I'll include a little tutorial that goes into further details on all of those in case you guys are interested. But I want to start back up with just the basic search. And let's talk a little bit about this subdivision search. So the rest of this stuff is kind of self-explanatory. The map tools we're going to be discussing after the break. But the subdivision search is actually one that I want to linger on just for a moment. When you guys are entering in a subdivision for a search, what you need to do is make sure that you have the words that you're wanting search by sandwiched in between the asterisks. Now, what this is doing is actually creating what's called a wildcard search. Now, the wildcard searches are fairly simple. Effectively, what this means is I don't care what comes after, and I don't care what comes before. So for instance, if this was the Eagle Ridge Estates, it would not care that there's a the missing, and it would not care that estates is not missing or is not there either. So when you guys put in those asterisks, it's going to make sure that all of the search functions that you got, or all the searching that you're doing, is going to be searching for just this phrase appearing within the subdivision. I can't stress this enough. This is one of the most common calls that we have for some reason with Matrix is I can't find this subdivision. And that's what it is just add in those asterisks. At the beginning and end is just the best practice. If you guys know that it's a specific name, you can type in the specific name. Let's just take a really common example, Minchell Park. So if I type in Minchell Park, I get nothing. If I add an asterisk in at the beginning, oops, doesn't add anything. If I add an asterisk in at the end, we suddenly get at least one property. If I start adding in pending and closed for the last 6 months, we have a lot more results. And again, all it is just because of that asterisk. And the big reason why that's the case is because we always pull the data for the subdivisions directly from the tax records. So you could have Minchell Park resub 5 part of Granite Park, or I don't remember what the other subdivision is nearby, but there's half a dozen Minchell Parks. It's wild. Anyway, so we're going to clear that all out. Now let's talk about our numbers over here on the right. So you saw me earlier just type in 250, and we ended up with 15 results. If I actually wanted to put in a range, it's just as easy as it is anywhere else. You put in a hyphen, and then you put in whatever the number is. So now, instead of just those 15 results, I've got those 15 and several more. I've got 321 results here for this price range. If I wanted to narrow this down further, say Ada, I'm going to say bedroom count. Let's do 3. And I'm going to actually put in a plus. So that instead of it just searching for just 3, it's going to be doing 3 or more. Which brings us back to 9. I want to do total bathrooms, 3 plus. I want to make sure that there's at least 2 bathrooms that are full. So we'll do 2 plus there, and we'll do 1 plus there. So fairly simple. That's what the pluses will do. Let's say that you do end up having the opposite need. So rather than just being like, all right, I can do 3 or more bedrooms, more realistic expectation or something or less would be the price. So for instance, if my client did have a hardline budget of $250,000, I'll put in 250 and then a minus afterwards. What that's doing again is making sure that it's searching for anything that is 250 or less, which is what that negative is going to do, the same way that the plus would do 3 or more. So I also wanted to briefly discuss this house square footage section. So if you do end up in a situation where you have a client that's searching for very specific square footage, or maybe they have a very specific square footage range, there's an important note about how our MLS handles the square footage. So in this case, the square footage for a property has to come from either the county assessor's office, so the tax record information, uh, the appraisal for the property. And if you guys are entering a listing into the system that was done with an appraisal, just bear in mind that that appraisal is actually going to need to be kept on file. So if somebody does ask, you need to be able to provide that paperwork immediately. You can't put in that this was an appraisal, but then you don't have the paperwork on it. Really, you were just trusting that the owner had given you the correct information when they told it to you. Unacceptable. So again, tax record information, an appraisal that you have on file, or you can use the building permit. This was mostly just a contingency added because we would have some new properties that were being put in, so new construction of some kind. So the building permit was really the only way to know that there was actually an accurate count on the square footage. Now, because we have those stringent restrictions on the sources that you can use to put in the square footage, we do provide people an option to at least put in their listings without one of those sources. It's just that because they don't have a valid source, they can't quote the square footage at all. Now, they can put in estimates, and that's actually going to be the house size, which we don't have on here. But if we do end up wanting to search for all of the properties, regardless of whether or not there was actually square footage quoted on it, you can do, so like let's say I wanted to do 2,000 square feet to 2,500 square feet. Maybe they didn't want any more. We still got 3 matches. Let's say I do have a listing in that area that was 0 square feet because they didn't have a valid source. I can put in 0 and then comma. What that'll do is it'll provide me not only the listings that have 0 for their square footage, but also the listings that have the square footage range that I provided. Now, this does seem like it might be something you may not have to use too often, but I'm going to do a quick search here and show you guys that of our, effectively 2,100 listings, we currently have 139 that don't have valid sources and are not reporting the square footage. So they have 0 for the square feet. That just means, again, that when you guys get into these listings, so jump into my results here. When you get into these listings, you may end up having to kind of extrapolate what the square footage actually is, because they can't mention it in the public remarks. Sometimes they'll mention it in the broker remarks, but they do have a space here called house size. And what this is effectively going to allow you to do is just put in the estimate. Now, part of the reason why we have this not reporting county assessor's office appraisal or building permit thing in the first place was because we had an agent that had put in that the owner stated it was one size. They implied that they had some kind of, excuse me real quick. They implied that they had some kind of appraisal done at some point. Then when the buyer ended up buying the property and getting in and doing an inspection of their own, they found that the size of the property was not quoted correctly. So because of that, there was a big lawsuit, people got sued, was not a good situation. So we do prevent people from putting in an exact estimate on the square footage if it doesn't have a valid source, but they can provide an estimate for the house as a whole under this house size option. So just keep track of that. And if you guys do end up in a situation where you're not going to be reporting the square footage, make sure that you put in that house size, because I don't know about you guys, but it's not very obvious how big the house is from here. Same thing goes with this other one where we've got what seems like a really nice house, but apparently doesn't have anything. So that's a little strange. They could have just put in the house size on the listing to at least get some advertisement to how large it is. All right. Let's jump back into our search criteria. Now, while we're going through all of this, you may have noticed that there is actually a relatively limited amount of stuff that actually comes by default on our search screen. If you do run out of things that you're wanting to search by, There's a section down here at the bottom called additional fields. This is where you guys can add in any of the additional options from our details that we asked for listings. Any of the changes that have been made to the listings are all documented. We keep a very detailed history of the listings that we do not edit. But all of those fields, all of those little details and specifications of the property can all be found under this available fields section and then added into selected fields. Now, one of the key things to remember here is that there is a lot of data that we keep track of for every single listing. And I mean, an immense amount of data. I mean, look at all of this. This is just huge. So one of the things that I recommend to people to kind of guide them on which elements to add. So for instance, if I had a client that was asking for properties that are specifically gated access, I'm going to go under the forms and contracts section, and then under MLS specific forms, and then matrix data forms. Now the matrix data forms are actually the property data forms that you guys would need to either fill out or at least hopefully be familiar with whenever you're adding a listing into the system. This provides you with all of the details that you guys will need to fill out, including which parts and pieces are actually required whenever you're adding that listing into the system. One of the things that I like about how this is laid out is that let's say that we do end up in a situation where somebody's asked for, oh, does it have a wine refrigerator, or is it a USDA residential or USDA rural development? All of those kinds of details are actually going to be provided on the listing, and the section that that particular detail is under is actually going to be named accordingly. So for instance, gated access, that's something that an HOA would be responsible for. So I can find gated access under the HOA amenities section. For USDA rural development, that's a finance option. So I can find that under the finance options section. Same thing goes if I have some appliances that I was interested in. So for instance, if I have somebody that wanted to make sure that there was a gas stove, doesn't necessarily even have to have a gas stove in the building, but just make sure that, the range is going to be a gas range because they're a foodie. We can see that that's here, gas range, and that's under the appliance connections section. So just to reiterate why this is important, again, if you find yourself in a situation where a client's asking for something, you think that you maybe seen that on a previous listing, or when you were looking at the property data form, you were like, I remember that being on there somewhere. Pull it up, find the section that that's in, and then you guys can use that in your search. So let's add those examples that I just made. So we want to get gated access, that's under HOA amenities. We wanted the USDA rural development, finance options. And we also wanted to see if it was a gas range gas stove. Perfect. So that's appliance connections. So we're going to start off. So in my case, I'm going to add that appliance connections here. And then I'm also going to hold down Control and select appliances included. I can add both of those at the same time. So both of those have been added. Now, HOA amenities, I have to scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. There it is, add. Okay. Now, finance options, again, I can scroll all the way around again to do so, or I can just use this search function down here at the bottom. Fine, finance options, add, easy peasy. I recommend using the search function whenever there is one. It just saves a lot of time and trouble. Same thing goes with transaction desk. A lot of people don't use the search function in that very frequently. But anyway, I'm going to head back. So again, I added in my appliance connections. So now I can double check whether or not the gas range is available. That narrowed down my search results to 659. I want to make sure that the range or oven is included. Okay, 574. HOA amenities, I wanted to make sure that the property that has all of these features is within a gated access community. Now we're down to 49, all right. And then finally, I also wanted to make sure that this was a USDA rural development option for the financing, and we're down to 4 matches. Now, just as a reminder, since I put in a bunch of criteria and the only thing that was selected by default was active, the listings that I'm going to find with that search, because I didn't clarify as price range or what the school district was, what the city was, or really just any location at all. When I go to my map, this is going to show me all of the listings across the entire state. So we've got one down here in Durant. We've got one here, looks like a Wasso, Claremore area. Got one that's out in Pryor. Wow. There's supposed to be another listing. I thought we had 4. Oh, are there 2 down in Durant, it looks like? Oh yeah, there's 2 down in Durant. And by the way, just as an aside, since this is something that's just kind of not really mentioned that often, whenever you guys are looking at your map, it's always going to show you how many of the search results are appearing in the particular window that you're looking at. So right now, I only see 2 of these. If I recenter this back so that I can see these 2 up here and these 2 down here, I can see all 4 of 4. If I zoom in at these 2 up top, again, 2 of 4. Just a little kind of quirky thing that they have there. Just makes it easier to recognize how many listings you're actually witnessing at this time. All right. And I think that's actually going to be our transition into the map search, which we are going to do after we get done with our break. So let's take a 10-minute break. It is going to be 9:56 when we start it. So if you guys don't mind, please be back at 10:06. I am going to verify that you guys are back. So make sure that whenever you do end up getting back to your computer, that you're available to validate that you're here. But we'll do that in a minute. In the interim, I'm going to put the video back on the screen. And we'll put the music back on. If you hear the music go away, we're getting started again. All right. We're going to go ahead and get back to it. Let's get this out of the way. All right. So we're going to get started again. Jump us back to our homepage here real quick. And if everyone wouldn't mind, please hit the raise hand button down at the bottom of your screen. Just let me know that you guys are back. We didn't used to have to do this with the non-CE version, but just to make sure that everybody's back, we can give you guys the CE credit for today. Awesome, I appreciate it. Thank you guys, everybody's back. So we'll go ahead and get started again. So I did want to do just a quick recap of some of the search functions. On our homepage, again, we had our search function that allowed us to search for specific addresses. We're an MLS listing. We made sure that all of our contact information was up to date. So whenever we go into a regular search, we can also send information out to clients, which we'll discuss in a minute here. And now that we're on our search page, we're going to discuss how to use the map search. So again, most of the basic elements on here are going to be relatively self-explanatory. Just remember the range option, the little checkbox here to turn it into thousands, especially for those of you guys working with leasing properties, the plus or minus for if you guys want more or less, and then of course the additional fields down at the bottom. Let's now talk about the map search. So rather than just using the proximity search that we had done earlier, I'm going to click map search. Then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be using the tools that are collected up here at the top to try and narrow down my search to a specific area. So let's actually go down here. Let's find a spot that has a decent amount of, you know what, whatever. We'll just use Durant since there's a lot of listings in this area anyway. So let's say that we do have a client that's looking for some land or properties in the Durant area. We can narrow down our search by just putting in Durant, and what that would probably end up doing, let's actually give that a try just so we can see what the results end up looking like. Durant, go to my map. You see how it ends up finding some listings that are kind of pretty far from where we were hoping to find them. So running my search just by the name Durant doesn't necessarily provide me with the results I was interested in. So if I just wanted to be searching within Durant proper, I can use this draw radius tool to actually click in the center of town and expand out. And then what that does is it actually gets rid of any of the listings that are outside of my shape that I've drawn and just include the ones that are within. Now we can move this around by just clicking on the dot and dragging. Notice how it's moving the entire circle with it. If I do end up moving this to a different location, you'll notice that it actually gets rid of any of the ones that was previously selecting, and it's only going to be using the ones that are within this shape that I had moved. So it's important to keep that in mind. You can also adjust the radius by clicking and dragging on the edge of it to expand its radius out or to contract it in. And then we also have the option to just delete the shape as well. So if you hold your cursor over that red dot, you can hit delete shape. If we ended up wanting to draw a rectangle around this instead of the radius tool, we can do draw rectangle. And that'll allow us to do effectively the exact same thing, except this time it's just going to be a rectangle shape instead. We can grab corners or grab edges, excuse me, and restrict it that way. So for instance, if we just wanted to do this half of the city, or if we wanted to do the opposite, click and drag. And then we also have the ability to grab the corners themselves, and you can do more than just one side at a time. Now, another important note about this is that whenever you guys are actually adding shapes to the map, you can add multiple shapes. So for instance, if I wanted to add in a radius tool as well, I can search for within this area and then also within this area. I believe you can add up to 7 at a time. It's either 7 or 5. I think matrix is 7 and then realist is 5. Oh no, did they up it again? Well, would you look at that? Hey, there you go. Okay. Now it's up to 9. All right. That's a new number. Okay. I'll remember that for next time. But if we do end up adding a number of shapes and we want to get rid of all of them at once, there is a little eraser icon here. So instead of having to add in a shape and then find the red dot and then delete every single one of them, you can just hit that erase option and it'll get rid of everything. Another important option is the draw polygon. So let's say that I wanted to kind of keep track of just the things that are within a little bit of space from the highway. What I can do is just use this draw polygon tool. And when you do your initial click, instead of dragging, I'm actually just going to be moving my cursor. You notice how there's this blue line that's now following that little reticle icon. That's my cursor now. And then as soon as I click, it turns that into a corner and solidifies the line that was drawn there. So now I've got another line that I can use. So notice it's still following my cursor with that faint blue. I click, click, and then I'm going to click back on the start point to finish off my shape. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be rectangular, or in this case, this looks like a rectangle with first person or with a forced perspective. Instead, what I can do is I can actually draw around this, back in here, cut out some of those properties there. There we go. So you can make all sorts of different shapes with that. I do actually prefer this over the freehand polygon, which is literally just click, drag, and it creates the shape for you. You let go, it finishes the shape off. Primarily, the reason why I don't like this one is because if I want to make an adjustment to it, I'm only making adjustments to a small part of it at a time. And since there's so many links because of how poorly I draw, it gets kind of cumbersome. So I typically prefer and recommend to people just using that freehand or the draw polygon tool. The easiest way for me to explain this is that this is effectively like the conspiracy theory boards. I don't know if you guys have seen those in movies, like that very famous Mel Gibson movie where he's got the conspiracy theory board where there's just a bunch of string attached to stuff. This is effectively like adding a little pin up at the top, drawing some string, adding a pin, drawing some string, adding a pin, and so on. So there we go. Anyway, so pretty easy. That's it for the map search functions. And again, clear all shapes will get rid of everything. Let's now talk about the layers that you can add. So when you guys are going through and searching by the map, you may end up wanting to include what the zip codes are, so we can see where all the zip code is. We can also see the official city limits. We can include any county lines, which of course I'm pretty deep in the middle of Bryan County, so there's not really any lines there, but I can zoom out and see that. We also have a school district line. So in case we just needed to make sure that this was in fact actually a property in such and such school district, we can double check that. Then we also have the neighborhood, which fortunately, you guys notice, there's not too many neighborhoods in the entirety of Oklahoma. So if you guys do end up wanting to use that neighborhood search function, they're mostly good in the really populated areas, but you guys can see some of these quote unquote neighborhoods are just really large. So it might not necessarily be helpful. Anyway, we also do have the flood zones. Now, some of these options, you're gonna have to actually zoom in order to be able to add. That's actually what this red is indicating. So as soon as I zoom in enough, then I can actually see the parcels and add in the FEMA flood zones. Now, once you add them, you can zoom out at least 1 or 2 ticks. Oh, nope, they fixed it. Dang it. It used to be that if you zoomed out immediately after checking it, it would keep it, but it does not appear that that's the case anymore. That's a bummer. Anyway, once you zoom in enough, you'll be able to see the FEMA designations for the flood zones. So if that is an important element to your client, so for instance, right now, a pretty substantial portion of West Tulsa bordering on the Arkansas River, if we did end up having one of those 500-year floods, there's a potential that all of this area would be underwater and for a long time because this is actually the flood plain rather than a floodway. Anyway, all of those designations, all of the codes that they're showing on the screen, like X500, X, AE. I don't think we have anything that's, yeah. All of that information is all going to be found on FEMA.gov. So if you have a client that ends up seeing the flood map or you show that to them or print something off for them and then they have further questions about it, you can send them to FEMA.gov. Now, another important note about our flood zone map is that we also decided a couple years ago, actually, when we had that big flood in 2019, which I think at least one of you guys was actually at the training that I did that day in Bartlesville. That was a pretty wild flood, ended up causing pretty substantial amount of damage, I think in the millions. But you can actually add in now, at least in Tulsa County, they decided to do a little bit more regionally specific flood zone map. that they created themselves. So the Tulsa County ended up going through and finding where a lot of the flood zones were after we ended up having that big flood to make sure that they had an updated version of that map. So you can add that. Again, unfortunately, that's only going to be available if you guys are working in Tulsa County, as you can see. So still good info if you guys need it, but it's only going to be useful if that's the area you're working in. Anyway, so that's about it for our main elements of the map. We do have other options to include whether or not listings are active, pending, et cetera, et cetera. All of these can be done with a search function, so you don't necessarily need those. You can add in parcel characteristics. So for instance, if you guys wanted to find out maybe what the square footage was for all the properties near this particular house, I can zoom in. I can add in lot area, and that'll show me how large each of the lots are. So here's some acreages, here's a bunch of half-acre properties, etc. There's also trends. Some of this you guys might recognize are actually tools that were available in Realist. So for instance, if you guys wanted to check what the sales activity was for this particular area, it's going to be done by zip code. So we can see, which properties or which zip codes have a substantial amount of properties that are moving in them or not. So just an extra way to kind of keep track of what the market's doing. All right, that's it. If you guys do end up having a search that you've run and you've navigated really far away from it, just as a reminder, there is this little reticle icon. You click on that and it'll bring you back to showing all of the search results that you've tracked down. Now let's go ahead and move over now to our results page. Now I mentioned earlier when we were looking for just a basic search that over here on the left-hand side, we'll be able to see the MLS number. And again, those first two digits are indicating what the year was that this particular listing was entered. So in this case, we've got one here on Plum, street, avenue, a bunch of these are missing the street type. Anyway, this is one that was entered in 2021. You can see that right here. Just out of curiosity. Anyway, we have been noticing a lot of people have been adding listings to the system without the street type. So avenue, road, drive, whatever. I don't know why you would do that. It just ends up hurting you in the long run as the listing agent, because when it goes out to Zillow or Trulia or Realtor.com or whatever, they may end up having some trouble tracking down the property, properly mapping it. But anyway, I ended up getting somebody who was very upset that the property was mapped incorrectly. Lo and behold, they were missing the complete address. And then once that was added in, it was the correct location everywhere. Imagine that. All right. So now that we're looking at our search results, let's talk about these different columns up here at the top. So we've got the MLS number. Again, we've discussed the only thing that's really important about that, the 2 digits at the beginning. You can click this to look at the listing details itself. Then we have the next column over, which is going to be the photos. It's like all of these properties have photos on them. If I click on one of those, it'll pull up the initial photo and I can scroll through to see the remaining photos. We also have a view map option. This is going to be really handy if you guys ever need to kind of get some context for where this particular property was. So remember, we can look at the map and see all of the listings that we found with our search, or we can actually click on this little icon here, or even just clicking on the address itself, and it'll show you exactly where that particular property is located. And again, we have our map pulled up so we can actually change this over to a satellite view. We can add in labels on the property, or we can see it without it. We can see the terrain, which of course this is relatively flat area, so there's not too much terrain to it, but you can see that there. And then we also have the option to add in any of those layers that we saw before as well. So it looks like this one's not very close to pretty much any flood zones. It's all very safe there. So we can let our client know that. So that's these two. We can click on the address to be able to pull up that map window again. And down on the right-hand side here, we've got a history option. It's going to be the kind of looks like a clock. Let me zoom in just a little bit so you can see it a little better. It's meant to look like a clock with an arrow pointing backwards. When you click on that, it's actually going to show you all of the history for this particular property. This one doesn't look like it has too much going on. Let's see if this one does. Hey, there we go. So this one shows not only the history for the listing itself, but it also shows us any of the sales history. So this isn't something that's necessarily related to an MLS. This is actually just indicating any time that property changed hands. So for instance, if you end up seeing something like this, where it went from, let's see, yeah, this was older, owner record to Glenda Hartigan, and then Glenda Hartigan ended up selling it to Accountability Property Management, and then here's the sales price. So it looks like they made a pretty decent amount of money off of that. Anyway, it also shows the mortgage history as well. So if you guys do end up in a situation where you need to kind of figure out what's happening here, you can see that on there. It's interesting that it's showing multiple instances like that. All right. Next icon down is going to be the transaction desk icon. This is if you guys are using transaction desk and would like to start a transaction for a particular property. So for instance, if somebody ends up telling me that this Pluto Road one is the one that they want to make an offer on, I can go over to this start a transaction icon, and this will bring me into a transaction within transaction desk that already has all of that information loaded from that listing. So it saves you guys a bunch of time. You don't have to enter anything in there or anything like that. It just automatically has all the details that you need because it's importing the data directly from that listing number. I add myself as a selling agent, residential sale, create. And whenever we get into the transaction, it's already got all of my details put in there. So we've already got all of the oh, it's a rendering. I was like, there's no way it's that flat wherever they live. Anyway, it shows all of the details. All of this was imported directly from that listing. So if you guys end up in that situation where you're needing to kind of just start from a listing, you can do so. It's very simple. But the next icon down is going to be our view documents option. Just as a reminder, all listings in our system have to have the property condition disclosure put in there unless they are either exempt or there's some other reason for it. So if you have a residential property that's for sale, it has to have the residential property condition disclosure. So if I click on this view documents, I should be able to see the property condition disclosure. And it looks like they've also got a lead-based paint as well. Interestingly enough, any of these documents that they've added will automatically be added to any transaction that you start for them. So any of the important documents will be moved over there for you, as long as the listing agent is sharing them, I should say. All right, a little further to the right, let's see if anybody actually has one. No, okay. That's okay. The next icon over here is actually just going to be the open house icon. So if anybody did have an open house, there'd be a little icon here, and we can see what the next open house is going to be. There's also going to be a virtual tour button. So in addition to all of the photos that you can add to a listing, you can also add in a virtual tour of a property. It can be one of those like 3D dollhouse images. It could be a slideshow. It could be just a video. There's a variety of different things you guys can use. Oh, actually, speaking of which, looks like we got a 3D dollhouse loading in right now. I bet if my computer was more powerful, this would be a lot faster. But anyway, there's a variety of different ways that you guys can do this. It's all going to be dependent on what the client's needs are. So if you guys do have a situation where you're just going to put in a short video or even just do a slideshow, that's fine. It's perfectly acceptable. Right. One important note about the virtual tours, you cannot use a link to a YouTube video. It's actually written into our rules at this point that we just don't want anybody to use YouTube for virtual tours. The virtual tours have to be unbranded legally. They can't mention anything about your name, your office information. It's got to be entirely unbranded. YouTube, just by its very nature, is going to either be branded in some way because you have to have a channel in order to put this information on, or if it's not branded, it's going to end up playing some video afterwards that could be completely and utterly unrelated to anything real estate, or it might bring you to a branded video. So we just decided no YouTube. It's the easiest way to prevent people from accidentally breaking the rules on that. Now, the final little icon here is actually the Realtor Property Resource. For those of you guys who have been in classes with me before, you probably have heard me add glowing reviews of RPR whenever I'm talking about it. I think it's a fantastic tool. I definitely think that this is something that's worthwhile. If you guys end up in a situation where you need to get a report really quickly, you can use this RPR to be able to grab all of the details about a particular property, and not even just from the listing or the tax records. RPR is actually a tool that the National Association of Realtors has put out. So you guys will have access to this no matter what MLS you're a part of, no matter what association you're a part of. And then whenever you search within RPR or click on the link from Matrix for one of the properties, it'll automatically pull you into all of the details about the property, all the facts that are being pulled over from the tax record information, school reviews by a company called Niche. They've got the AARP livability index, giving you guys an indication of what it's like, or how nice it is to live there. Affordability and access is nice and high. Health is pretty low. It's all going to be dependent on a variety of different details. They've got history, which is going to show, again, all of the history of the property, not too much in this case. Same thing goes with charts, gives you guys some context for this particular zip code within Bryan County, within Oklahoma, all that kind of stuff. So there's a variety of different things that's really useful for RPR. If you guys are interested in that at all, I can't stress enough how useful that can be. We're probably going to be doing a presentation on RPR at the beginning of next month. Just keep your eyes peeled for whenever we refresh the calendar, which should be tomorrow, I think is when we're going to be updating that. So strongly recommend that you guys attend that. If you're unfamiliar with RPR, it's a fantastic, fantastic tool. Anyway, let's now talk about the, right, is this the next step? Yeah, that's the right step. Okay. So now let's talk about, so since we've described all of these different columns, let's talk about the columns and how we can adjust this. So for instance, if you guys do end up wanting to get rid of something that might be redundant, like in this case, the school district that I ended up finding all of these properties in is Durant, except for these down here at the bottom. If I know that I want my property that I'm looking for my client to only be Durant School District, I can go back to my search criteria and add that in here, or I can use this as a primary sort to make sure that I'm only seeing the results that I want in the order that I want. If I do end up in a situation where it's completely redundant, so for instance, if I have Durant for school district and city, I go to my results, now the only properties that I'm going to see are going to be in the Durant school district. So I may not want this column any longer. So what I can do is I can actually hold my cursor over this column to just turn into that four-sided arrow and then move it back and forth to try and get it into the proper position for me. Or what I can do is just click on the, click whenever you guys are on that blank space and then do remove column. So if there is something that's redundant, like if I was searching for just houses In the Durant School District, I can get rid of school district and get rid of the subtype. And notice how much cleaner all of the information looks now. But let's say I still wanted some context for maybe how large the property was. So not just the square footage of the building itself, but the actual acreage. I can click on this column again, and instead of doing remove column, I'm going to do insert column this time. And we'll just add in acres. Now, just as a reminder, this is a relatively long list. So if there was something specific that you wanted to add, like showing contact, apply, I can add in maybe who the contact is. So like list agent full name, list agent email, work phone number, apply. I can add all of those in at once. But I'm going to add in just simply the acres. There we go. And we can get rid of any of these extra columns still. And I can always rearrange the acres to be in a different position as well. Now, all of this rearranging and everything is going to disappear the next time I sign into Matrix. So if you guys do end up getting an arrangement that you like, so these are the columns that I always want to see whenever I'm getting into Matrix, and I always want to see the acres, price, et cetera, I can go up to the top right here where we've got the cogwheel, and it says set/clear defaults. Just click on that, do set current display, sort order, and count per page as my search starting default, which means that the next time I get in here, I'm going to have all of this information saved in the exact same order. It's going to remember what my sort was. It's going to remember how I had all of these columns arranged. It's going to remember everything about this. So if I set that as my default, the next time I get in to do a search, it's going to remember all this information. Now, let's say that I maybe created a custom look. So I wanted this to actually be something that I can print off for my clients. So I'm just going to say city, add that in there. And that way they can see all of this information, and I can just print this off, which is an option we'll be discussing in a minute. If I would like the way that this is arranged, but I don't want this to be my system default, I can actually use this Manage Display button up at the top to allow me to save this as something different. So for instance, if I wanted to do simple, there we go, save as a copy. That save as a copy will make sure that I can come back to this particular view anytime I want up here at the top. So this display will now have my simple, and then I can just rearrange everything into that layout. And you'll notice that all of the ones that I've created with that manage display option will have a my prefix. So if I switch this over to houses, I can see I've got all of these were active already. So I could just remove that column. It looks like I did already. I've got my address, I've got my subdivision, and then I've got the rest of the details in here. So I already had created a custom display there at some point. My houses, sub, and acres. I can also go to my default, which allows me to see a few extra columns in here. Maybe there's a different sort order. Maybe I'd given them a little bit more breathing room, whatever the case may be. So you guys can always use that manage display to create something useful if need be. And if you guys want to get rid of something that you've created in the past, so like this simplified one, don't need this anymore, I'm going to go up to the top under manage display and do delete simplified. All set. And then if you guys want to set everything back to just the system default and not use any of these custom ones or any of the ones that the system has created for you, you can always go up to set clear defaults and do reset to system search defaults, which is the second option here. And that brings me back to just the exact same layout that we've had since, I want to say 1992 was when they first started doing this. Anyway, all right. So that's it for discussing how we can mess with the arrangement of the results. Let's actually talk about how to do something with these results. So I mentioned at the very beginning of class that we're going to be given the option to start sending information off to clients. And part of the reason why we wanted to make sure that all of our information was up to date was so that when we did that, we actually sent information off to a client about a listing. That information would include all the details about me and make sure that they know who it was that sent it, how to get back in contact with me, etc. So down here at the very bottom is where we can see some of those options. We've got an email, print, CMA, directions, export, quick CMA, and showing time. All of these are grayed out right now because I don't have any selected, which is what these checkboxes are for over on the left-hand side. As soon as I select one, I see the rest of these open up. So for instance, if I wanted to send this 12th Avenue one off to a specific client, I can select it, click on email, and it'll bring me into an email interface where I can either just directly type in the email address of the person that I'm sending this to. So I'll do george.foreman@georgeforeman.com. I don't know that I'm spelling this name right. Anyway, I can send off an email directly to an individual just by putting in their email address. Just keep it simple. Or if you guys do end up adding in a specific contact, so if I had him already added, you can add him either by one email address or the other, but that contact will actually now keep track of all the different things that I've ever sent to them. We'll do a brief overview of the contact information at the end of class, but I can't stress enough how valuable it is to actually use the contacts in the system. And again, primarily just because it's going to keep track of everything that you've done with that particular individual. Makes it a lot easier to find out, all right, I got this listing. Hey, I want to go out and take a showing on this listing. And you're sitting there like, I don't even know which one you're talking about. When did I send this to you? And it was an auto email or something. So keeping those contacts in the system is an extremely useful thing. I also wanted to point out there is a create a new contact button. So for instance, if you don't have your information in there yet, if the client is not somebody that you've created, you can do create a new contact and it'll give you the information that you need to put in. So the yellow parts are the only parts that are required. It's very simple. If you already know their name and you're going to be sending them an email, you have everything that you need to create a contact. So there's really no reason not to. All right. Let's also talk quickly about the other options on here. We've got a CC. You can add in another contact if you would need to. Just as a heads up, when you guys are creating a new contact, you can add more email addresses to a contact. So for instance, if you guys wanted to do Mark and Mary, there you go. Perfect. And then I can just put in one email address, comma, 2@email.com. Perfect. So this way, if you have a couple, you can send it both at the same time, or you can just carbon copy someone on there. You also have the option to blind carbon copy yourself on a message. This would make sure that you receive a copy of the properties information as well. Again, this is just to make, I usually recommend not doing this. The only time I think that it's actually useful to do that is if you guys end up in a situation where clients are saying, oh, you know, I never ended up receiving any of your emails that you've ever sent. You can blind carbon copy yourself to make sure that you see that those are getting sent out and that they may be having some kind of technical issues on their side. We also have an option that they just added, which is the send link via SMS text message. That's only going to be available if you have a client that you've added that has a mobile phone connected to them. So under this create new contact, there's a phone option. Make sure that you add it under the cell choice. Then finally, you can put in the email body, subject, and it's got our signature already down at the bottom. So whenever you hit send, the client is going to end up receiving that email, and it's going to contain a link that says view listings, as well as whatever the other text was that you had sent to them. Just as a reminder, this is going to bring them into a system called One Home. If you guys have not sent yourself anything, I would very, very strongly recommend that you guys use your matrix system to send to a personal email address. So not necessarily the one that you guys have registered with yourself with our membership, but one that's actually going to go directly to you, and just create yourself as a client, find out what it looks like, explore the One Home system, get familiar with it. because we do end up getting a lot of phone calls from people that just haven't ever been into that side of the system before. And then they're calling in for us to troubleshoot through them for their client. I know it seems like we're kind of shifting some of the burden of educating your clients onto you, but I promise if you're familiar with this stuff, your clients are going to have a lot more confidence in what you can provide them. Anyway, also, I wanted to mention we have a print option. The print option is actually something that we mentioned earlier when we were going through and adding all of our information into the system. I mentioned that there was the print header footer section. This is where we're going to see that information get added. So you can see we've got a list on the left-hand side showing all the different reports that we can add. And then on the right-hand side shows our options. So here we've got header and footer is automatically going to be included. We can choose whether we want that to be on the first page and last page rather than being on every page. I have mine set to every page. And I also at some point went down to this client full and checked the checkbox for print with rollouts. If you're following along either currently or on the recording, I would very strongly recommend that you guys choose either the agent full or client full and then check this checkbox that says print with rollouts. I'm going to uncheck this and show you guys what this looks like with and without. So if I leave that off and I do client full with all photos, go to the preview. Where are the photos? I've got one photo here and nothing else. Meanwhile, if I switch this over to print with rollouts, preview, no additional rooms, but I do see the additional photos now. So if you do end up in a situation where you want to send all of the information about the listing, you're not going to be able to do so without that checkbox checked. So make sure it's checked. It'll remember your selections. The next time you get in there, you don't have to do it again. There's also a checkbox there for print search criteria. I actually think this is something that's extremely useful for people, especially if you guys have a client that's a little bit kind of hard-headed about things like, wow, I don't know why I actually need a realtor for anything if I can just do all this searching myself. Well, if you end up including your search criteria, they can do the exact same thing. If they find that maybe you narrowed down and curated this to their liking, that could actually be a beneficial thing. It can kind of prove your value to them. All right. I also wanted to point out that there are 5 different reports that are available on this print option that are actually not meant to be done by the public. And what this is actually kind of indicating to you is these are agent specific. This is going to include some information that's actually not meant to be shown to the public because it's information just for members of the MLS. By that, I mean, we've got the compensation values, we've got what kind of listing agreements there are. The agent full will also include the broker remarks, which sometimes includes information that the public is not meant to see, like gate codes, any kind of contractual specifics that are not things that the public should know about until they're in a transaction. There's a bunch of different stuff that you don't want to show. So just make sure that if you guys are sending things off to a client, you're using these client options instead. Now, there's also going to be a couple different reports that allow you guys to put out a different version of the CMA. So if you guys find yourself running a lot of CMAs and kind of getting bored with the way that it's laid out, or maybe it's just way too dense or it's way too open, you guys can change those with that. I apologize. What is making that noise? It's Outlook. There we go. Now, if you do end up wanting to kind of get a preview of any of these, there's a preview option on any of the top reports. The ones down below are going to allow you to only either email a PDF or print the PDF. These are great options. I actually kind of like using those. We'll talk about those more in a minute, but I'm going to head back to my results. We have a CMA button. I'm not going to be discussing this at all today. We do have a CMA matrix class next week, though. So if you guys are interested in learning about CMAs or how to do them or why to do them, or any of that, especially for those of you guys who are new or relatively new, that can be incredibly helpful. So strongly recommend that class. We have a directions button. So if we had multiple different listings selected, We can actually get a map that kind of gives us some guidance between those. It's going to try and do that in a smart way. So you notice how it effectively created a path from one location to the next. You can rearrange all of these. I don't see a lot of people using this particular function, but especially for those of you guys who work out in the boonies where you might not always get great cell service or something like that, you can actually use this to create effectively a map quest for those properties, get directions, email them to yourself, print them off for your client, whatever the need. This is also a great way for you guys to get information for showing tours out to your clients if you guys ever have that situation. All right. And we've got an export function. We're not going to talk about it in class today, but if you guys do end up wanting to do mail merges or just create a report that includes a bunch of the details that you need and put it into an Excel spreadsheet, you can do that with export. If none of that sounds of any interest to you, don't worry about it. It's not something that people use too often. Oh, looks like one of the listings that we found earlier has already changed its status. What a surprise. We've also got the quick CMA button. This one I can't recommend enough. If you guys are in a situation where you guys just want to grab all of a bunch of listings and put them onto a piece of paper together, you can do this select page, which is going to be the top of the column, and select them individually. Or you actually have an all, none, or page button right up here that allows me to select all 27 of the 27. If I just select everything on this page, there's going to be these other two listings on the next page that I did not have selected. So that all button allows me to just get everything at once. But this quick CMA button will gather everything into the spreadsheet format. It's going to be in a layout that actually makes sense to clients, and it's also going to include a bunch of visual representations of what these are actually meant to show. So even if you do have somebody that's English isn't their first language or something like that, they'll be able to actually see, all right, this is square footage. I don't know what that means. Oh, but it's got a little square. We've got BR for bedroom, looks like bedroom illustration, full bath, half bath. I looked at this. It just shows the bathtub cut in half because, I don't know about you guys, but I love when my bathtub doesn't have a wall on one side, so everything just spills out. Garage, your built, acres, which I wish acres was indicating how many trees there were on the property. Anyway, one of the nice things about the CMA or quick CMA option is that when you guys are having all of this displayed, it's going to show you guys some interesting stats down at the very bottom, the min, max, average, and median for all of the different details. And then it's also going to collect all of them down at the bottom to show a total listings and quick statistics as well. Now, the quick CMA option is going to be even more beneficial if you guys have multiple statuses. So if you have a bunch of active listings and then a bunch of pending listings, then a bunch of closed listings, it's going to collect each of those and provide these min, max, average, and median stats at the bottom of each section for each status. So that way, if you have a client that's kind of like, the market's going up, you can see the properties that are closed in the last 6 months are actually a lower value than the properties that are currently on the market or currently pending even. So really easy to kind of get all of that put together in one place. And then finally, we've got our showing time link. Just as a heads up, we previously were going to be trying to move over to a new showing system. We had initially switched over from a company called CSS, the Centralized Showing Service, a couple of years ago when they ended up getting bought out by Showing Time. Showing Time was subsequently bought out by Zillow recently, and so our board decided that we needed to, actually our former CEO decided that we needed to move to a new system. Sentry Key is available if you guys would like to use that as your showing service, but we also have Showing Time as well. Currently, we're going to be running both of those at the same time. We'll let you guys know if there's any changes to that in the future. All right. I did want to talk briefly about the refine option. After we've sent any emails off to any of our clients, we can then see if we've sent anything to someone. So for instance, if I switch over to George Foreman, you'll see that it adds in an additional column that shows emailed, and property fit, which is something that they can do. If I go back to my first page, you can see that for George Foreman, I've actually sent off only this particular listing. So it's an easy way to kind of make sure that you don't accidentally send somebody the same thing multiple times. There's a couple other useful tools for it, but I would recommend watching our video tutorial on that. We don't cover it too much in this class. Next, let's talk about the save options. Now, the saved searches are, in my opinion, one of the more useful functions in the system as a whole. The saved search is going to keep track of all of the criteria that you put in. So in my case, mine was exceedingly simple, just residential, active, house, Durant, Durant. Okay, easy peasy. So I could probably just name this Durant, call it a day. There, but I can either save this as just one for a contact. So in this case, I can connect it to a specific individual, or I can even save this as something on my favorite search on the Home tab. Now you may have noticed when we were on our Home tab earlier that there are favorite searches here. So I can quickly jump back into a search that I had constructed a long time ago. No matter how complicated or simple it was, I can see all of those properties. So when it's a live search, it's not going to bring me back to a bunch of properties that I had found previously. It's going to run that exact same search all over again. So finally, let's talk now about the auto email function. So I'm going to actually click on this recent searches button over on the side. Let's get back to our Durant listings that we were looking at. And we're going to do new auto email this time. Now, the auto email function is something that I strongly recommend for you guys. Whenever you have a client that's got an interest in a certain area, especially with the market being what it is right now, it's hard to keep track of what's going on. This auto email is going to do a constant search for whatever the criteria was that you had initially put in. So it doesn't matter which ones you've selected or which ones you've checked or whatever, it's only going to be searching. And then anytime a new listing happens to match the criteria that you initially established, it's going to send out an email. Now that email is going to be defined down here at the bottom by this particular schedule. So we either do as soon as possible, one that's daily. You can choose whether you want them to be sent in the morning at 8 or in the evening at 6, or you can send it to the tire kickers that are probably never going to actually buy something and do a monthly email instead. So I would recommend, if you guys are setting any of these up, at least in the next, I don't know, probably year, since it seems like this is going to take a while for the market to normalize again, the ASAP option, primarily just because what this is going to do is as soon as a listing gets added that matches the criteria of your search, they will receive the email, which is this recurring email, to let them know that there's a new listing that's been added. It'll do that within 15 minutes. So rather than waiting until 8 a.m. the next day or 6 p.m. that evening, it's going to send it immediately. This can be a little bit weird if you have somebody that's looking for something and another agent ends up adding something at like 10 o'clock at night. They get an email at 10 o'clock at night, but they got that email at 10 o'clock at night. Maybe they can get the jump on everybody that's going to have to wait until the next business day to go sign in and check what's going on. So strongly recommended. We do have a video that covers that as well. The final option is carts. We have a video about this. I'm not going to cover it in class today, but it's useful. It's very specific in how it's useful though, so we're not going to discuss it. So now I wanted to cover the very last thing, which is our contacts. So we mentioned already, I mean, even at the beginning of class, that you can send things out to clients, that you can end up connecting searches to clients. You can set up auto emails for them to receive automated listing updates. But let's now take a look at that contacts section. So the contacts section is fairly simple. It shows us the name, the email address, and then it breaks it down into what category they are. So whether they're buyer, seller, prospector, friend, there's a bunch of different options there. We can see whether or not we have any active auto emails. In this case, it doesn't look like I have any set up. I can also see if I have any saved searches. And then over here to the right, you can see that we've got carts, listing notes, favorites, and discards. So it looks like this contact here actually has a bunch of favorites and notes. So I'm going to click on that one. When you click on their name, it's going to bring you to effectively a dashboard for them. It shows all of those same categories of information that we just saw, auto emails, whether we've created any cards or CMAs, any of the emails that we've sent out to them manually, as well as any of the searches that we've created for them and saved. And then since I've emailed this information off to the client, they also have the ability to run a search within One Home themselves. And what's really cool about that is that you as the agent will be able to actually see any of the searches that your client is running. So if there's maybe, some communication that you guys have had about, what their needs were, and maybe they tried to communicate some of that, but they weren't particularly good at articulating it, you can go into this One Home searches if they have any and find out what they are searching for. So that if maybe you need to adjust what you're looking for that client, you can, because they're actually revealing what it is that they're looking for here. There is also an option here for reverse prospecting. I'm going to be including a video with our recording that talks about that. Strongly recommended that you guys take a look at it. But up here at the top right, I can see all the favorites they've saved, all the notes they've saved, and any of the properties that we might have sent them that they didn't like. But all of that can be found under this contact section. Again, strongly recommended that you guys take a look at this, explore this area. And then of course, again, we have a bunch of video tutorials online as well as a support knowledge base. So if you guys are back in the MLS portal, there's going to be a button underneath where you guys found the matrix link. And it's going to say simply support. There's a bunch of written tutorials here. So if you guys are ever just curious where to find something or how to define something or what the process is for a certain function, you guys can at least double check in here to see if it's available. So for instance, if I wanted to learn more about auto emails, there we go. We've got a whole article that's just auto emails and matrix. There's even a video tutorial linked inside it. But that's it for our class today. It's 11 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and officially end. If I could get everybody to hit that raise hand button one more time. Again, this is just for the CE credit. Just so that you guys have some context on why we ask you guys to hit that raise hand button. This is effectively just to prevent us from having to require that your video is playing the entire time. If we change the way that we're doing it right now, everybody's going to have to be on the screen all the time, and I have to make sure that you're actually watching, which is as much a burden for me as it is for you guys, maybe more so just because there's so many people. I don't want to do that. I want to try and make sure that this is all very approachable and accessible. So anyway, if you guys have any questions, I'm going to leave the session open for a few minutes, but beyond that, I'll go ahead and close up shop and we'll get this information sent off to get you guys the CE credit for class today. So again, just to be clear, class is officially over if you guys want to dip, but if you have a good question or anything you guys wanted to make a commentary on, you guys can go ahead and do so now, and I'll leave the session running for another minute or so. Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you guys for joining us.